She said she could end a life without ever lifting a hand against it. She said 4 spirits answered to her and had for 40 years. Tonight, in her own words, she tells you exactly what she did with them and to whom.
TheSpiritVox, it's alive.
By the time I was a teenager, my grandfather was gone. But I learned something that changed everything. My father carried the same gift. 4 spirits had passed to him the way some families pass down land or debt. I begged him to teach me. He refused for months. He told me, this knowledge doesn't care if you're good or bad. It only cares if you're strong enough to hold it. I can't promise you'll only do good with it. I promised him anyway. I told him I would only ever use it to help people. I believed myself when I said it. I want you to remember that, because it matters for everything that comes after. The 4 of them accepted me the way they'd accepted my father. I won't give you their true names. I'll only tell you what I called them. Marrow, Ash, Ross, Hessa. For the first few years I only did good work, cleared curses, settled troubled houses. Every so often someone would leave a little money on the table out of gratitude, and I told myself that was enough. Then the other kind of clients started finding their way to my door. People who didn't want healing, people who wanted revenge or money or someone gone, and they paid more in one visit than I earned in a month doing good. Greed doesn't announce itself. It just quietly rearranges your priorities until one day you realize the good clients have stopped coming and you don't miss them. I want to tell you, before we go any further, what I came to understand about this gift. There is no such thing as light work and dark work. There's only the hand that holds the tool. Give a man a rifle and he can rob a bank or guard one. The rifle doesn't care either way. My spirits didn't care either way. I was the one who decided. I decided wrong more times than I can count. What I'm about to tell you are 5 of those times. Eventually, the trouble I caused at home followed me out of the country. I moved across the ocean to a quiet coastal town in Cornwall, hoping for a fresh start. It didn't take long before people there found out what I could do, and the same 2 kinds of visitors began arriving at my new door. One afternoon, a well-dressed woman came to see me. Her jewelry alone told me she didn't need to worry about money. She set a thick envelope of cash on my table and said, "You're going to help me, whatever it costs." I asked what she wanted. She said she wanted her son's wife gone, either dead or driven out through divorce, whichever came easier. I asked why. She said her son had married against her wishes, and she despised the woman he'd chosen. "She's using him," she said. "I won't watch my son's life belong to a stranger." I took the photograph she brought, and I sent Marrow to do the work. The young wife was devout. She prayed every day without fail. So we started small. Marrow began planting doubt in her, whispering just enough confusion that she started skipping her prayers. First 1, then 2, then most of them. Once her faith had thinned out, I moved to the next step. From the night it went into the ground, something changed in that young woman. A cold resentment toward her own husband began to grow in her, quietly at first, and then it wouldn't stop. She started finding fault in everything he did. She accused him of things he hadn't done. The arguments grew louder and uglier until neighbors started calling the police just to break them apart. Within months, it ended in divorce. The mother-in-law showed up at my door with a box of sweets and a bonus on top of what she'd already paid me. She looked lighter than I'd ever seen her. I remember thinking at the time that I'd done a good job. It took me years to understand what I'd actually done, taken a marriage that might have survived its rough patches and made sure it couldn't. Not long after, I got a call from someone I'd known years earlier back home. She and her husband were renting the house, and the landlord had ordered them out with no real reason given. They didn't want to leave. She told me plainly, if the landlord died, there'd be no one left to enforce the eviction, and they could stay as long as they liked in peace. She offered me a small fortune to make it happen, more than enough to make me forget any hesitation I might have had. What I needed for this kind of work isn't something I enjoy describing. It involves an item touched by the rights of the dead. I won't go further than that. She managed to get it to me from back home, and I prepared a piece of clothing with it in secret over several days, drying it carefully out of the sunlight. I told her to have it wrapped as a gift, something a young woman might wear, and given to the landlord's daughter as though it were nothing but a kind gesture. The daughter wore it within the week. The landlord collapsed not long after, and no doctor could explain what was wrong with him. He was gone within 2 months. A week after I heard the news, the money arrived exactly as promised. And if it hadn't, I want to be honest with you, the tenant who hired me understood perfectly well that her own fate might have ended up matching his. The third story I want to tell you is harder for me to say out loud even now. A woman came to me, still married to her husband from a previous marriage of his. 3 children lived under that roof. 2 were hers, and 1, a daughter, belonged to her husband's first wife. The stepmother's fear was simple and ugly. If her husband died, that stepdaughter would inherit a share of everything. She wanted that share erased before it could ever exist. She offered me an enormous sum, and I agreed, without a second thought. I gave her 2 eggs, and told her exactly how to feed them to the girl. The moment the girl ate them, I sent Ash to take hold of her. What followed was a slow unraveling. The girl grew erratic. Her moods turned violent and unpredictable, and she began hurting herself in ways her family couldn't stop or explain. Her father, desperate and wealthy enough to try everything, took her from doctor to doctor. When none of them could help, she was admitted to a psychiatric hospital. That was, for me, the moment she stopped being difficult to reach and became easy. I weakened her further from a distance, until there was almost nothing left of her own will. One night, in a moment no nurse could account for, she was gone. The hospital staff assumed the worst and closed the case quietly. Only her stepmother and I ever knew the truth of what had actually happened in that room. I'm not going to defend this one. I only promised you the truth, not an apology for all of it. The fourth account happened while I still lived back home, before the trouble with the mother-in-law's case pushed me out of the country entirely. A local politician came to me, worn down and furious. He explained that if his opponent simply disappeared before the election, his path to office would be effortless. I asked for a photograph. He handed it over along with an agreement, a very large sum, on the condition that his rival never lived to see election day. I began the work immediately. Within days, I discovered his rival wasn't unprotected. Another practitioner had already bound spirits to guard him, and the moment my spirits moved against them, a real fight broke out. Not fists, not knives, but a battle of will fought entirely in the space between the seen and unseen. I felt myself losing ground fast. For the first time in years, I understood what it meant to be afraid of losing. I went back to my client and told him the price had doubled. He agreed instantly. He wanted this badly enough to pay anything. With that, I found a different approach. Rather than attacking the guard spirits directly, I spent over a week working to trap them, one by one, till they were bound and helpless, unable to protect anyone ever again. Once they were secured, I turned my attention to the practitioner who had set them there in the first place. I had my spirits end him quietly, in his sleep, before he could ever wake and retaliate. 2 problems solved with a single act. With his protection gone, the rival candidate was defenseless. I couldn't strike him directly, that would have been noticed immediately, so instead I turned toward someone close to him, someone whose death might look ordinary enough to pass without much question. It worked exactly as I planned. On paper, the death looked natural. No autopsy was ever requested. If one had been, the truth would have told a very different story. That case and the mess it stirred up in my hometown afterward is the real reason I eventually had to leave the country for good. The last of these darker stories involves a man I never met and never needed to. A rival of his came to me wanting his competitor's business destroyed completely. He brought photographs, a name, and enough money that I didn't ask many questions. My spirits went ahead of me to study him first, to see if anyone else had already claimed him for protection. He had none. He didn't believe in any of this. That made him the easiest kind of target there is. I had him fed something laced through a sweet and something else slipped into his tea. From there I worked on his mind, quietly clouding every decision he tried to make. Every deal that should have gone well fell apart in his hands. Every safe choice turned into the wrong one, as if something kept nudging him one careless step to the left, again and again. It took a few months. A man who had built an empire from nothing ended up losing all of it, piece by piece, until there was nothing left for him to lose. The weight of it broke something in him that never quite recovered. I know how all of this sounds to you. I know you probably think I deserve every bit of hatred people have thrown at me since. Maybe I do, but every story has 2 sides. And for every one of these, there's another I could tell you where I gave people their lives back instead of taking them. On the day everything is finally weighed, we'll see which side of the scale was heavier. Not everything I did was for money, and not everything I did was cruel. I want to tell you about a family who came to me with nothing to offer but their desperation. A woman showed up at my door in tears, begging for help before I'd even said a word. Her husband couldn't hold a job. Neither could her grown sons. Every door that should have opened for them stayed shut, for no reason anyone could explain. Their house stayed filthy no matter how many times she cleaned it. A stench would return within the hour from nowhere anyone could find. clothes in the closets turned up, sliced open, as if someone had taken a blade to them in the night. No daughter in that house could keep a relationship. No son could get married. Every promising match fell apart at the last moment over some excuse or another. I turned her away the first time. Her family was poor, and I already knew she couldn't afford what this kind of work usually costs. She came back weeks later and dropped to her knees in front of me, crying that her youngest daughter now had cut marks appearing on her skin from nowhere, and a man's voice had started coming out of her mouth at night. That was enough. I agreed to help, no charge. I sent Marrow ahead to the house to look around before I ever set foot there. He came back and told me plainly this family was drowning under a curse, and whoever had done it had set several spirits loose specifically to make sure nothing good ever touched that household again. When I arrived at the property myself, I noticed crows and hawks circling endlessly above the roofline, a sure sign, if you know what to look for, that a house is sitting under a curse. I spoke to each family member separately. The youngest girl, only 9, told me she kept seeing a woman whose body was on fire, who visited her in dreams to frighten her. Her older sister described shadows moving through the rooms at night, and the feeling of unseen hands trying to drag her out of bed while she slept. Their father, a gentle, devout man, told me something was working constantly to keep him from his prayers. Once, an unseen force had shoved him so hard mid-prayer that he was thrown several feet across the room, breaking his nose on the way down. I confronted the daughter who'd been showing the worst symptoms. The moment I stepped into her room, she lunged at me before Marrow and Ash caught her mid-air. I asked what was inside her and who had sent it. It admitted through her mouth that it was bound and terrified of its own master, and refused to give a name unless I could deal with that master directly. I did. It turned out the family's own sister-in-law had hired a practitioner to curse them out of spite after they refused to let her son marry into the family. I confronted the woman by phone, calm at first, then direct. When she refused to call off the curse, I gave her a warning she chose not to take seriously. Sometime later, while hanging laundry on her rooftop, she fell, pushed, if I'm being honest, by Ross, exactly where I'd stationed him, and broke her leg badly enough that she had to be wheeled to her in-laws' door to beg forgiveness herself. She called off the curse the same day. The second good deed I want to tell you about took me somewhere I never expected to end up, the private estate of a wealthy old family in the countryside, people with more money and more history than anyone I'd ever worked for. Word had reached them through a mutual contact that I might be able to solve a problem none of their doctors or priests had managed to touch. They couldn't come to me themselves, their standing wouldn't allow it, so I was invited to their home instead. Nothing prepared me for what I felt the moment I stepped past their gate. Their estate backed onto a huge stretch of forest, and from the gate to the front hall, every shadow, every corner, every threshold was crawling with spirits, not ordinary ones either. Whoever had set this guard in place was no small talent. Once inside, the family treated me with real warmth, seated me, fed me, and finally explained the problem. 2 brothers were locked in a bitter fight over the family's inheritance. One brother's wife pulled me aside and said plainly, "My husband's own younger brother has had him cursed. A small boy tugged at my sleeve and said in a shaky voice, "Daddy talks funny now." I asked where his father was. His mother said quietly, "Upstairs, but you should know what you're walking into before you agree to this." I told her I could handle it. The guard spirits watched me the entire walk up those stairs, circling closer, testing whether I'd flinch. I didn't. With Marrow and Ash beside me, they couldn't touch me no matter how badly they wanted to. Inside the room, the husband paced back and forth like a man trapped in his own skin. The moment I entered, I understood he was possessed and actively possessed right in front of me. The room felt wrong in a way that had nothing to do with lighting. Every lamp was on, and still the space felt swallowed in shadow. He looked at me first and sneered in a voice that wasn't quite his. "You used to put curses on people. Now you come to take them off." He was speaking a language he'd never learned fluently, and his whole family stood in the doorway in stunned silence, hearing their husband and father speak words that weren't his own. I asked everyone to leave the room. Given who they were, their guards were reluctant to let me work alone with him, but there was no other way, and eventually they allowed it. Once we were alone, I demanded to know who was inside him and why. It answered in a rough, mocking voice, refusing to give a straight answer, taunting me instead. I stayed calm and kept working through the older methods I knew, the ones I rarely needed anymore. Eventually, its voice began to slip. I lit a small flame and held it close, the old method for burning a spirit out for good, and worked through it until the thing inside him turned to ash. I thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. The moment it was gone, the guard spirits from outside the estate poured into that room like the walls weren't even there. I'd never seen a barrier of mine breached like that in all my years of this work. Marrow and Ash held the line while a new voice spoke through the husband, calmer this time, almost respectful. It told me its master wanted to speak with me directly, one professional to another, and that fighting further would put both our lives at risk. I sent Marrow to go meet with it. He came back and told me there were over a dozen practitioners involved on the other side, working out of a group overseas. The one behind this particular curse sent word that continuing this fight would end badly for everyone, and suggested we both step back and let the family settle their inheritance dispute the ordinary way, without any more interference from either of us. I finished clearing the possession from the husband and told the family everything, who had done this and why. Their suspicions had been right all along. The younger brother, driven by greed over the family estate, had ordered the entire thing. He was away at the time, and once he was brought home and shown the proof, fear did what argument couldn't. He confessed everything and agreed to lift the curse for good. With both sides finally standing down, the brothers settled the inheritance dispute peacefully between themselves. The family sent me home with a reward larger than anything I'd ever been paid for darker work. I tell you these two stories, the poor family and the wealthy one, because I need you to understand something. What I carry isn't evil by nature. I've used it to destroy people, and I've used it to save them. The same four spirits who ended lives in my other stories are the same four who stood between a possessed man and his own family and won. That's where the woman's account ended for that night. Before we move to our final story tonight, I want to share something shorter, sent in by a listener who says this happened to him as a boy. I was in 4th grade the year it happened. My older brother had one of the only phones in our whole neighborhood, and I used to borrow it constantly just to play music while we walked. One evening, we were walking home from the market, about a mile out from our house, along the edge of a stretch of flooded fish ponds. Everyone in town knew to be careful out that way after dark. Too many strange things had happened along that road over the years. My brother walked ahead of me. I trailed behind with the phone in my hand, music playing, the little flashlight beam bouncing across the water. The moon was out, bright enough that I could see clearly in every direction, except for one thing. Far off across the flooded field, I saw someone walking toward us through the shallow water. At first I thought it was just the man who watched over the ponds at night. Whoever it was picked up their pace the moment they seemed to notice us. That's when my phone died. Not low battery, it just cut off completely mid-song and wouldn't turn back on no matter how many times I tried. I kept my eyes on the shape the whole time. It was pitch black, not just dark clothing, but a blackness that seemed to swallow more light than the night around it should have allowed. It stood taller than any grown man I'd ever seen. And here's the part that still bothers me most. The water came up to its knees exactly like it would on a person, but the surface never moved. No ripple, no sound. It was walking, but the water sat perfectly still, like it was gliding just above it instead of through it. I didn't say a word to my brother. I just kept walking, eyes locked on it, too afraid to look away. It closed the distance to maybe 8 or 10 feet from us and then simply stopped, stood there, upright, silent, still just a shape of pure black where a face should have been. I caught my foot on a clump of dirt in the path, stumbled, and when I straightened up and looked again, nothing, no one there, nothing in the water at all. We made it home without anything else happening. When I turned the phone back on later that night, it had over a quarter of its battery left. I asked my brother if he'd seen it. He said he hadn't seen a thing. I've never fully explained that night to myself, but it wasn't the last strange thing I saw out near those fields, just the one I remember most clearly. Our final story tonight is the longest and by far the strangest one we've received in a long time. It comes from a man who asked us to call him Peter, describing what's happened to his older brother, a man we'll call Nathaniel. Nathaniel was, by every account, the sharpest person in his family. He'd earned scholarships through most of his schooling, worked a respected office job in the city, and was, according to everyone who knew him, disciplined almost to a fault. He wasn't the type to joke around, and he definitely wasn't the type to believe in anything he couldn't measure or prove. One week, Nathaniel told his parents he was heading into the mountains with a group of friends for a camping trip. His parents agreed without hesitation. In fact, they were relieved. Nathaniel had recently agreed to an arranged marriage once he returned, and the whole family was looking forward to the celebration that would follow. It felt, for a little while, like nothing but good things were coming their way. He left with his friends for a week in the backcountry. While they were out there, near a stretch of ridge locals called Widow's Hollow, the group decided to set up a campfire and grill their dinner for the night. A few locals passing through warned them not to light anything there. They said the ground belonged to something that didn't take kindly to fire being set on it. Nathaniel laughed it off, louder than anyone else in the group. He told them flatly that superstitions like that were exactly the kind of thing holding people back, that in an age of science, nobody needed to be afraid of empty ground. The exchange turned tense enough that his friends eventually just pulled him away to avoid a real argument breaking out. The locals mentioned an elder nearby who could prove there was more to it than superstition, and half-jokingly dared Nathaniel to go see for himself. Nathaniel, never one to back down from being told he was wrong, showed up the next morning and argued with the old man directly, mocking his beliefs to his face in front of the whole group. When he finally turned to leave, the elder called after him calmly, "You've said your piece. Now we'll see how it goes for you." Nobody thought much of it at the time. A week later, Nathaniel came home. He walked in that evening, and without a word to anyone, went straight to his room and locked the door. That alone should have raised concern. Nathaniel always greeted every person in the house the moment he walked in, always asked after his parents, always checked in with his siblings. Every single time, without exception. Not that night. The family assumed he was exhausted from the trip and let it go. He slept straight through until the next afternoon, missing his morning routine entirely for the first time anyone could remember. When he finally emerged, everything about him seemed completely normal, and the family breathed easier, assuming it had just been fatigue. That evening, right around sunset, everything changed. They heard the anklets before they saw her, a soft, deliberate jingling sound coming down the hallway, the kind a woman's ankle bracelet makes with each step. Nathaniel's younger sister asked, confused, what that noise even was. She recognized it, but none of them could figure out where it was coming from inside their own house. Then a woman walked into the room. It was Nathaniel. His father, more embarrassed than afraid at first, snapped at him to go change and stop whatever this joke was. Nathaniel said nothing. He simply sat down. When his father pushed again, Nathaniel answered in a voice that wasn't his. Low, layered, unmistakably a woman's voice coming from his own mouth, and told his father, in words dripping with contempt, to mind his own business. His father went completely silent. Nathaniel then turned to his mother and, in that same voice, demanded his dinner, insisting she stop asking questions and simply serve him, warning her that he didn't want anyone in that house getting hurt. Terrified, she brought his food. He ate enough for 5 grown men in one sitting, then rose from the table, walked to his room with that same graceful feminine gait, and went to sleep. The next morning, he woke up completely normal, got ready, and went to work like any other day. For a while, the family convinced themselves the whole thing had been some strange one-time episode brought on by exhaustion. They were wrong. It happened again the next evening, and the one after that. Every night at dusk, without fail, Nathaniel disappeared and something else answered to his name until morning. Nathaniel's demands grew bolder by the week. He asked his sister why her clothes and makeup kept ending up in his room, insisting he hadn't touched them though. Everyone knew exactly who had. He came home one evening carrying shopping bags full of women's dresses, makeup, and perfume, walking with that same unmistakably feminine gait even while dressed as himself. One night, when his father finally tried to put his foot down and end the behavior for good, Nathaniel slammed his hand on the table hard enough to crack a plate and told him in that same cold female voice that he wasn't the manservant and that his mother would serve his meals exactly when he demanded them from now on, or there would be consequences for the entire family. A local doctor. His father was too afraid to argue further. The family tried everything they could think of. quietly, without letting the story spread through their small town. A local doctor found absolutely nothing wrong with him physically and prescribed medication that did nothing at all. Every evening, right on schedule, the transformation returned. Eventually, his mother tried something small and desperate. She whispered a blessing under her breath and blew it gently over his head while he sat across from her. The moment she did, Nathaniel struck her hard across the face and warned her, in that same woman's voice, never to try anything like that again, or she would regret it, far worse than a slap. Nathaniel's father finally admitted, to a coworker he trusted, that something was deeply wrong at home. That coworker mentioned a psychiatrist he knew personally, well respected in the field, and suggested they at least try a professional evaluation before anything else. The father brought the doctor to the house directly. Before the doctor even reached the bedroom, Nathaniel came out on his own, laughing, and turned the conversation entirely around, mocking the doctor for daring to treat someone else's family when Nathaniel claimed his own wife was currently leaving him for one of his own colleagues. The doctor went pale. It turned out to be true. He hadn't told a single person about it, not even his own family. Rattled, the doctor pulled the father aside outside the house afterward and told him quietly that, despite his medical background, some things simply couldn't be explained by science. He gave them the name of a minister he trusted, someone with real experience in cases like this. The first minister they brought in didn't last 10 minutes in the room. Nathaniel danced mockingly to every verse the man recited, taunting him the entire time, telling him plainly that his prayers held no power here. The minister asked everyone to leave the room, and when they came back in minutes later, they found him sitting in the corner, badly shaken, with a clear handprint bruised into the side of his face. He left immediately and never returned. Before he drove off, he quietly asked the father for banking details, not to charge his usual fee, but to refund the deposit he'd already taken, insisting he wouldn't accept payment for a job he hadn't been able to finish. A second younger minister came a few days later, more confident than the first. The same scene played out. Nathaniel danced through every verse untouched, taunting him relentlessly until the minister made the mistake of getting too close. Nathaniel's hands shot around his throat before anyone could react, and it took 3 grown men to pry his grip loose. Once freed, the minister backed toward the door and told the mother plainly, in a shaking voice, that whoever she brought in next needed to actually know what they were doing, because the men she'd tried so far clearly didn't. On his way out, he told the father something that changed the whole shape of the problem. This wasn't just a wandering spirit. Someone had deliberately called it down and aimed it at Nathaniel on purpose. Peter, hearing that, immediately thought of his brother's camping trip and the argument on the ridge. He drove straight to his brother's closest friend, a man named Dorian, and asked him directly what had actually happened out on that trip. Dorian admitted everything. He described the warning from the locals, Nathaniel's mocking laughter, the trip to the old elder's home the next morning, and Nathaniel's face-to-face argument with him. He admitted the group had assumed, once Nathaniel came back to work looking completely fine, that whatever tension existed out there had simply passed. They hadn't wanted to alarm anyone over what felt, at the time, like nothing more than an awkward disagreement with a stranger. Peter brought this to his father immediately. There was only one option left, driving back out to that same ridge and asking the old elder himself to undo whatever he'd set in motion. Two days later, the family packed a car and made the long drive back out to the mountains. Peter, his parents, and Nathaniel, who had to be sedated for most of the trip so he wouldn't fully wake and resist along the way. They arrived and checked into a small motel near the ridge, and Nathaniel didn't wake until well past noon the next day. Once he came to, still groggy, they made the final drive out to the elder's home. The moment Nathaniel was walking through the gate, the old man's expression didn't change at all, as if he'd been expecting exactly this. "There you are," he said calmly. "I told you it wouldn't go well for you, and here you are, back at my door because of it. Tell me what you need." Nathaniel's parents dropped to their knees in front of him, begging forgiveness on their son's behalf, insisting he was a good man who'd made one terrible mistake in not believing. Nathaniel himself, present and lucid in that moment, quietly apologized to the elder directly. The old man had him sit down, placed a hand gently on his head, and Nathaniel's whole body began to shake violently, uncontrollably, for nearly 3 full minutes, before finally going still. When it passed, the elder looked at him and said, "Whatever else you do in your life, don't ever mock things you don't understand again. The world you can measure is smaller than you think." There are things science will never reach, no matter how far it goes. The stars, the ocean floor, none of it matters if you can't respect what's standing right in front of you. Go home, live well, and don't make this mistake again. According to Peter, there was never another incident after that night. Nathaniel went home, resumed his life, and eventually went through with the wedding his family had been so looking forward to before all of this began. That's where tonight's stories end. I want to be honest with you the way I try to be every time we share something like this. None of us behind this show can tell you with certainty what's true and what isn't in accounts like these. What I can tell you is that they were sent to us in good faith by people who believed every word of what they described. If you made it this far into the dark with us, you already know what to do. Like this video, subscribe if you haven't, and leave your own story in the comments below. We read every single one, even the ones we wish we hadn't. Until next time, keep the lights on a little longer than you think you need to.